Queen Camilla drew herself up to her full height, and, for a moment, the weight of centuries of tradition seemed to settle around her shoulders like a royal mantle. The corridor had grown completely still, with even the usual background sounds of castle life seeming to pause in anticipation of her decision. "Sergeant Mitchell," she said finally, her voice carrying the formal tone of official pronouncement, "step forward." Sarah moved with precise military bearing, stopping at the exact distance protocol dictated for addressing royalty. Her heart was pounding, but years of military discipline kept her expression neutral and her posture perfect. "Your Majesty," she replied with crisp precision. Queen Camilla studied her for a long moment, and something in her expression had shifted. The stern disapproval was still there, but it was now mixed with what might have been grudging respect. "I have spent my life serving an institution that has endured for over 1,000 years, she began, her words measured and deliberate. "That longevity comes from more than just tradition. It comes from the ability to adapt while maintaining the essential qualities that define us." Princess Charlotte remained silent, but her posture suggested readiness to intervene again if necessary. Colonel Harrison stood at rigid attention, clearly understanding that whatever happened next would have implications far beyond the immediate participants. "This position," Queen Camilla continued, gesturing toward Sarah's post, "requires more than technical competence. It demands absolute loyalty, unwavering discipline, and the willingness to sacrifice everything for duty. These qualities are not determined by gender, background, or any other factor except character." Sarah felt a flutter of hope, but she maintained her neutral expression and waited for the Queen to continue. "Your performance record speaks for itself, Sergeant. Your handling of the security incident demonstrates practical capability under pressure. But what I needed to determine today was whether you understand the true weight of this responsibility." "I believe I do, Your Majesty," Sarah replied carefully. "Do you?" Queen Camilla's eyes sharpened. "This is not just a job or a career advancement. When you stand at this post, you represent something larger than yourself. You carry the trust of everyone who depends on the security and stability this institution provides. Are you prepared for that burden?" The question went to the heart of everything Sarah had worked toward. She thought of her parents back in Yorkshire, proud but worried about their daughter's dangerous chosen path. She thought of the other women in the military who were watching to see if doors would remain open or slam shut. She thought of the oath she had sworn and what it truly meant. "Your Majesty, I am prepared to give everything I have in service to the Crown and the people it represents. That commitment doesn't change based on who questions it or what obstacles arise. It is absolute." Queen Camilla nodded slowly. "And what would you say to those who argue that your presence here represents a departure from tradition that weakens rather than strengthens this institution?" It was a loaded question, one that could easily become a trap if answered incorrectly. Sarah considered her words carefully before responding. "Your Majesty, I would say that the strongest traditions are those that maintain their core purpose while adapting to serve each generation effectively. The tradition here is excellence in service and protection. The individual who embodies the tradition may change, but the standard remains constant." Princess Charlotte smiled slightly at the response, and even Colonel Harrison's rigid posture relaxed fractionally. The answer demonstrated both respect for tradition and understanding of the deeper principles it represented. Queen Camilla was silent for several moments, clearly weighing the implications of her next words. When she spoke again, her tone carried a note of finality that made everyone listen more intently. "Sergeant Mitchell, you have made it clear that you understand both the honor and the burden of this position. Your qualifications are documented, your performance is proven, and your commitment appears genuine." She paused, and the silence stretched until it became almost unbearable. "However," she continued, and Sarah's heart sank, "I want to be absolutely certain that you are prepared for the scrutiny that will follow. Your presence here will be noted, discussed, and debated far beyond these walls. Every action you take will be examined not just for its own merit, but for what it represents about the future direction of this institution." "I understand, Your Majesty," Sarah replied, though she wasn't entirely sure where this was leading. "Good. Then, you should also understand that failure is not an option. Not just personal failure, but any failure that reflects poorly on the position itself or on the decision to place you here. The standards for you will be higher than for others, fairly or unfairly. Can you accept that reality? The honesty of the statement was both brutal and refreshing. Queen Camilla was acknowledging the unfairness of the situation while also making clear what would be required to succeed within it. Yes, Your Majesty. I accept that responsibility. Queen Camilla turned to Colonel Harrison. Colonel, I want regular reports on Sergeant Mitchell's performance. Not because I doubt her capabilities, but because exceptional situations require exceptional oversight. Of course, Your Majesty, Colonel Harrison replied promptly. And, Charlotte, Queen Camilla addressed her granddaughter directly, I appreciate your intervention today. Your instincts were correct, and your approach was appropriate. Princess Charlotte inclined her head gracefully. Thank you, grandmother. I simply wanted to ensure that fairness prevailed. Queen Camilla returned her attention to Sarah one final time. Sergeant Mitchell, you have earned your place here through merit and demonstrated capability. That place is now secure, provided you continue to uphold the standards that brought you here. Is that understood? Yes, Your Majesty. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, Queen Camilla replied with what might have been the ghost of a smile. Thank me when you've successfully completed a full rotation without giving anyone reason to question this decision. With that, she signaled to her entourage that the inspection would continue. As the royal party moved on to other areas of the castle, the immediate tension in the corridor began to dissipate. Princess Charlotte lingered for a moment as the others departed. She approached Sarah with a warm but professional smile. Well handled, Sergeant, she said quietly. Both the incident you resolved and today's challenge. Thank you, Your Royal Highness. I appreciate your support. You earned it through your own merit, Charlotte replied. But remember what my grandmother said about the scrutiny you'll face. It may seem unfair, but it's also an opportunity to prove that excellence has many faces. As Princess Charlotte departed, Colonel Harrison approached Sarah with an expression that mixed relief with renewed determination. Outstanding work today, Sergeant, he said. You handled a difficult situation with exactly the professionalism this position demands. Thank you, sir. I won't let the regiment down. I know you won't. But, remember, this was just the first test. There will be others, some more subtle than today's confrontation. Stay focused, maintain your standards, and trust in your training. As the corridor returned to its normal quiet state, Sarah resumed her position with renewed purpose. The morning's events had changed something fundamental about her role here. She was no longer just a guard who happened to be female, she was a symbol of possibility for others who would follow. The weight of that responsibility was significant, but it didn't feel crushing. Instead, it felt like a natural extension of the commitment she had made when she first put on the uniform. She had come here to serve, to protect, to uphold something greater than herself. Looking back, Sarah would remember this day not as the time she was almost dismissed, but as the moment she truly understood what it meant to be a guardian of tradition while also being an agent of progress. The two roles were not contradictory, they were complementary parts of the same essential duty. As the afternoon wore on and castle life returned to its normal rhythm, Sarah stood at her post with quiet pride. She had passed a test she hadn't expected to face, earned respect she thought might never come, and helped open a door that would remain available for others who were ready to walk through it. The tradition would continue, strengthened rather than weakened by the recognition that excellence could emerge from any source. And Sarah Mitchell, daughter of Yorkshire coal miners, guardian of royal tradition, would ensure that this hard-won progress was protected with the same dedication she brought to protecting everything else under her watch. Princess Charlotte approached the group with measured steps, her expression calm but determined. At 28, she had spent enough years observing palace dynamics to understand when a situation required careful intervention. She had heard enough of the conversation to grasp its implications, and something about the exchange had triggered her protective instincts. "Grandmother," Charlotte said respectfully as she joined the group, "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." Queen Camilla turned toward her granddaughter, her stern expression softening slightly but not disappearing entirely. "Charlotte, dear. I was simply conducting a routine inspection of the guard detail. Nothing that should concern you. Of course, Charlotte replied diplomatically. She glanced briefly at Sarah, who remained rigidly at attention despite the obvious tension surrounding her. I was actually hoping to speak with Colonel Harrison about security arrangements for next week's charity event. But, perhaps I could observe the inspection process? I'm always interested in learning more about how these traditions are maintained. The request was politely phrased, but everyone present understood its true meaning. Princess Charlotte was positioning herself as a witness to whatever was about to unfold, and her presence would make any harsh treatment of Sergeant Mitchell a much more delicate matter. Queen Camilla's eyes flickered with recognition of the subtle maneuvering, but she maintained her composure. By all means, dear. Education is always valuable, particularly regarding the responsibilities that come with our positions. Colonel Harrison looked relieved at Charlotte's arrival, though he remained cautious. The princess had a reputation for fairness and thoughtfulness, qualities that could prove crucial in defusing the current situation. He straightened slightly and prepared to continue with whatever direction the inspection might take. Now then, Sergeant, Queen Camilla resumed, turning back to Sarah, perhaps you could demonstrate some of the skills that qualified you for this position. I'm particularly curious about your crisis response protocols. Sarah's mind raced as she considered how to respond appropriately. Demonstrating her abilities while maintaining proper respect for royal protocol presented a complex challenge, especially with the obvious undercurrents of the situation. Your Majesty, I would be honored to demonstrate any procedures you wish to observe, within the bounds of current security protocols, she replied steadily. Princess Charlotte stepped forward slightly. Actually, that's an excellent idea. I've often wondered about the training process for the Queen's Guard. Sergeant, could you explain the evaluation criteria you had to meet? The question provided Sarah with an opportunity to present her qualifications objectively, without appearing to boast or defend herself inappropriately. She began to describe the physical fitness requirements, marksmanship standards, and psychological evaluations that every guard candidate had to pass. As Sarah spoke, her confidence grew. These were facts, measurable achievements that spoke for themselves. She had not just met the standards, she had exceeded them in several categories. Her voice remained respectful but carried the quiet authority of someone who knew her capabilities. The marksmanship qualification requires scoring in the top 15% of all candidates, she explained. Physical fitness standards include specific benchmarks for endurance, strength, and agility under various conditions. The psychological evaluation examines decision-making under pressure, adherence to protocol, and ability to maintain focus during extended periods of high alertness. Queen Camilla listened with a neutral expression, but Charlotte appeared genuinely interested in the details. And how did you perform in these areas, Sergeant? I scored in the top 5% for marksmanship, exceeded physical requirements by significant margins, and received commendation for tactical thinking during simulation exercises, Your Royal Highness. Colonel Harrison nodded confirmation. Sergeant Mitchell's performance was exceptional throughout her training cycle, Your Majesty. Her instructors noted particular strengths in situational awareness and rapid threat assessment. Princess Charlotte turned to her grandmother with a thoughtful expression. It sounds like the selection process is quite rigorous. I imagine maintaining such high standards ensures that only the most qualified individuals reach these positions. The comment was diplomatically phrased, but its implication was clear. If Sarah had met all the established criteria, then questioning her suitability based on other factors raised uncomfortable questions about the fairness of those standards. Queen Camilla recognized the subtle challenge in her granddaughter's words. Standards are indeed important, Charlotte. But we must also consider whether all aspects of suitability can be measured through tests and evaluations. What additional aspects do you think should be considered? Charlotte asked with apparent innocence. The question put Queen Camilla in a difficult position. Any answer that suggested gender as a disqualifying factor would be problematic, especially with multiple witnesses present. She paused for a moment, clearly weighing her response. Experience, she said finally. Real-world experience under pressure. The ability to handle unexpected situations that no training can fully simulate. Princess Charlotte nodded thoughtfully. That makes sense. Have there been situations where Sergeant Mitchell's experience has been tested? Sarah remained silent, knowing that this exchange was happening above her pay grade, but she was grateful for the princess's subtle advocacy. Colonel Harrison cleared his throat gently. Actually, Your Majesty, there was an incident last month that might be relevant to this discussion. All eyes turned to him, and he continued carefully. We had an intruder alert in the early morning hours. Someone had bypassed the outer perimeter and made it into the castle grounds. Sergeant Mitchell was the first responder. Queen Camilla's interest sharpened. I wasn't informed of this incident. It was resolved quickly and posed no actual threat to royal family members, Colonel Harrison explained. But the response demonstrated exactly the kind of real-world capability you mentioned. Charlotte looked at Sarah with new interest. What exactly happened, Sergeant? Sarah glanced at Colonel Harrison, who nodded for her to continue. Your Royal Highness, I detected movement in an area that should have been secure. Following protocol, I called for backup while moving to intercept. The individual turned out to be a confused tourist who had gotten lost during a public tour the previous day and had spent the night hiding in the gardens. That doesn't sound particularly threatening, Queen Camilla observed. No, Your Majesty, Sarah agreed. But the response protocol assumes the worst-case scenario until proven otherwise. I had to approach the situation as if it were a genuine threat while being prepared to de-escalate if circumstances warranted. Colonel Harrison stepped in to provide additional context. What Sergeant Mitchell isn't mentioning is that she managed to detain the individual without causing panic among the overnight staff, coordinated with castle security to verify his story, and ensured that the incident was resolved with minimal disruption. Her handling of the situation was textbook perfect. Princess Charlotte smiled slightly. It sounds like real-world experience validated the training assessments. The group fell silent as the implications of the story settled over them. Sarah had been tested under actual conditions and had performed exactly as her training and qualifications suggested she would. The incident provided concrete evidence of her capability that went beyond any theoretical concerns about her suitability. Queen Camilla studied Sarah with new attention, as if seeing her clearly for the first time. The young woman standing before her wasn't just a symbol of changing traditions or a political statement about gender equality. She was a trained professional who had proven her worth under the exact conditions that mattered most. Colonel Harrison, Queen Camilla said slowly, I assume this incident was documented according to standard procedures? Yes, Your Majesty. A full report was filed and reviewed by the Security Oversight Committee. Sergeant Mitchell received a commendation for her handling of the situation. Princess Charlotte stepped forward slightly, her voice carrying a note of quiet authority that reminded everyone present of her royal status despite her youth. Grandmother, it seems to me that Sergeant Mitchell has demonstrated exactly what you were looking for. Real experience, professional competence, and dedication to protecting this institution. Isn't that what truly matters? The challenge was direct but respectful, and it left Queen Camilla with limited options for response. She could continue to press her concerns about tradition and gender roles, but doing so would require her to dismiss objective evidence of Sarah's qualifications and performance. The corridor remained silent as Queen Camilla considered her next words carefully. Everyone present understood that her response would set a precedent that extended far beyond this single interaction. The decision she made would reflect not only on Sarah's future, but on the monarchy's relationship with the changing expectations of the modern world. The abandoned car park beneath Waterloo Station seemed like the perfect place for what Tommy Carlyle had planned. Isolated, multiple escape routes, and far enough from the palace to avoid the heaviest security presence. What Tommy didn't know was that James Whitmore had been leading him there deliberately. Inspector Ashford coordinated the operation from a command vehicle positioned 6 blocks away, his radio crackling with updates from surveillance teams that had been tracking the situation for 3 hours. Target 1 has entered the underground facility, reported Detective Constable Williams. 3 additional subjects approaching from the south entrance. Sarah Mitchell adjusted her position in the shadows near the main exit, her hand resting on her weapon while she watched the carefully orchestrated trap unfold. James had insisted on minimal backup, arguing that too many officers would spook the Brotherhood into aborting their plan. "All units, remember the priority is evidence collection," Ashford's voice came through their earpieces. "We need them to commit to criminal action before intervention." James descended the concrete ramp into the dimly lit parking structure, his footsteps echoing in the empty space. His civilian clothes made him look like any other Londoner, but beneath his jacket was a recording device that would capture everything about to happen. Tommy emerged from behind a concrete pillar, flanked by Pete Wilson and 2 other Brotherhood members that James didn't recognize. The scarred enforcer carried a tire iron with practiced ease, while Pete's massive fists were wrapped with chains. Well, Tommy called out, his voice carrying clearly in the enclosed space. "The famous palace guard decides to take a little walk." James stopped about 15 feet away, maintaining distance while evaluating his opponents. 4 men, all armed, all positioned to cut off escape routes. It was a professional setup, but they had made one critical error: they thought they were hunting him. "Gentlemen," James replied calmly, "I believe you wanted to speak with me." Tommy laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Speak? No, soldier boy. We're way past talking. See, you embarrassed our president in front of the whole world. Made the Brotherhood look weak. That's not something we can let slide." Marcus Richardson brought that humiliation on himself when he attacked a Queen's Guard with a weapon. "Maybe so," Tommy admitted, beginning to circle slowly. "But reputation is everything in our line of work. You cost us respect, so now you pay the price." Pete cracked his knuckles, the sound sharp in the concrete chamber. "Should have taken the transfer when you had the chance." James noticed the 4th man moving to flank him from the left, completing the encirclement. Standard intimidation tactics, designed to make the target feel trapped and desperate. What they couldn't know was that James had spent years in situations where being outnumbered was normal. "Before we proceed," James said conversationally, "I should mention that assaulting a member of the Queen's Guard carries a mandatory minimum sentence of 7 years. Tommy spat on the concrete. "Won't matter much if you're not around to testify." The threat was clear and recorded. James touched his collar briefly, a signal to the surveillance team that criminal intent had been established. In the command vehicle, Inspector Ashford leaned forward as the audio feed carried Tommy's words clearly. "That's conspiracy to commit grievous bodily harm at minimum. Do we move now?" Sarah's voice came through the radio from her position. "Negative. Let's see how far they're willing to take this." Tommy raised the tire iron and pointed it at James. "Here's how this works. We're going to beat you unconscious, then we're going to make sure you never wear that fancy uniform again. Message sent, lesson learned." James shifted his weight slightly, a movement that looked like nervous tension to his opponents but was actually preparation for explosive action. "And after that?" "After that, maybe we pay a visit to that pretty detective who arrested Marcus. Show her what happens when people interfere with Brotherhood business." The threat against Sarah changed everything. James's expression hardened almost imperceptibly, but the shift was enough to make Pete pause in his advance. "That would be unwise," James said quietly. Tommy mistook the warning for fear. "Would it? See, that's the problem with you military types. You think your training makes you invincible. But there are 4 of us and 1 of you, and we're not playing by army rules." James smiled, and something about that expression made all 4 men suddenly uncertain about their plan. "You're right," James agreed. "This isn't the army." He moved without warning, covering the distance to the nearest attacker in 2 quick steps. The Brotherhood had expected him to wait for them to close in, but James had learned long ago that in close quarters combat, the advantage went to whoever struck first and struck hard. The tire iron never connected. James caught Pete's wrist in mid-swing and used the big man's momentum to slam him face-first into the concrete pillar. Pete dropped like a stone, unconscious before he hit the ground. Tommy swung his own weapon in a vicious arc aimed at James's head, but the guardsman ducked under the blow and drove his elbow into Tommy's solar plexus with surgical precision. The enforcer doubled over, gasping for breath that wouldn't come. The third man rushed forward with a knife, but James sidestepped the clumsy attack and delivered a precise strike to the nerve cluster in his attacker's neck. The knife clattered away as the man collapsed, temporarily paralyzed. The fourth Brotherhood member, seeing 3 of his companions neutralized in less than 10 seconds, made the smart choice and ran for the exit. James let him go. 3 prisoners would be sufficient for prosecution, and the fleeing man would spread word of what happened here, which served its own purpose. Tommy struggled to his knees, still fighting for breath. This isn't over. Yes, it is, James replied calmly. He reached into his jacket and produced a small recording device. Conspiracy to commit assault, threats against a police officer, possession of weapons with intent to cause harm. I think you'll find it very much over. Sarah appeared from the shadows, weapon drawn but not needed. Armed police. Stay on the ground. Additional officers poured into the parking structure from multiple entrances, quickly securing the scene and taking the conscious Brotherhood members into custody. Inspector Ashford arrived moments later, surveying the aftermath with professional interest. 3 men neutralized without serious injury, clear evidence of criminal conspiracy, and the threat to royal security effectively eliminated. Guardsman Whitmore, he said formally, that was either the most reckless or most brilliant operation I've witnessed in 20 years of police work. Sometimes they're the same thing, sir, James replied, straightening his jacket. Sarah coordinated with the arrest teams while emergency medical services checked the unconscious Brotherhood members. Pete Wilson had a broken nose and possible concussion, while the man James had struck in the neck was already regaining feeling in his extremities. No permanent damage, the paramedic reported. Professional work, if I may say so. The recordings would provide clear evidence of the Brotherhood's criminal intentions, while their arrest in the act of conspiracy would allow prosecutors to seek enhanced sentences. Combined with Marcus Richardson's existing charges, the leadership structure of the London chapter would be effectively dismantled. 3 weeks later, James stood at his post outside Buckingham Palace, watching the familiar flow of tourists and Londoners going about their daily business. The media attention had finally died down, though he still occasionally noticed someone taking his picture with obvious recognition. The trial had been swift and decisive. Marcus Richardson received 8 years for assault and weapons charges, while Tommy Carlyle and his associates were sentenced to 6 years each for conspiracy and attempted assault. The Brotherhood's London operations had collapsed entirely, with remaining members either arrested on related charges or fleeing to other territories. Detective Inspector Sarah Mitchell stopped by during her patrol, something that had become a weekly ritual since the incident. "Quiet day?" she asked with a smile. "Thankfully," James replied. "Though I suspect that won't last indefinitely." Sarah nodded, understanding the reality of London's criminal ecosystem. The Brotherhood's elimination had created opportunities that other groups would eventually try to exploit. "Any word on your next assignment?" she asked. James had been offered several positions since the incident, including a return to active Special Forces duty and a promotion to training command. But he had declined them all. "Staying here for now," he said simply. "Turns out I enjoy the work." Sarah laughed. "Most people would call standing motionless for hours incredibly boring." "Most people don't understand that protection isn't about action," James replied. "It's about preventing the need for action through preparation and presence." A tour group approached, and James resumed his ceremonial stillness as cameras began clicking. To the tourists, he was exactly what they expected, a perfectly disciplined soldier in an iconic uniform, representing centuries of British military tradition. What they couldn't see was the highly trained Special Forces operator beneath the ceremony, constantly evaluating threats and ready to respond to any challenge with precisely the force necessary to neutralize it. 6 months later, the incident had become legend in both military and police circles. Videos of Marcus Richardson's defeat continued circulating on social media, often accompanied by commentary about the hidden capabilities of Britain's ceremonial forces. The lesson had been absorbed by London's criminal community as well. The Queen's Guard were no longer seen as easy targets or symbolic figures. They were recognized as what they had always been, elite soldiers whose ceremonial duties in no way diminished their combat effectiveness. James received a letter from Colonel Hartley, who had followed the entire affair with professional interest. "James," the letter read, "your actions have reminded everyone why the selection process for ceremonial duties is so rigorous. You've shown that tradition and capability are not opposing concepts, but complementary ones. Well done." The recognition was appreciated, but James's satisfaction came from something simpler. The palace gates remained secure, the public could continue to visit safely, and potential troublemakers now understood that respect for British institutions wasn't optional. Detective Inspector Sarah Mitchell was promoted to Detective Chief Inspector, with her handling of the Brotherhood investigation cited as exemplary police work. She maintained her friendship with James, often stopping by during patrols to share coffee and discuss the ongoing security challenges facing London. Marcus Richardson served his time quietly, using his prison years to reflect on the choices that had led him to attack someone so obviously capable of defending himself. Upon his release, he avoided any involvement with motorcycle gangs, instead finding work as a mechanic in a small town where his past was unknown. Tommy Carlyle proved less adaptable to incarceration, earning additional time for prison violence and refusing all rehabilitation programs. The Serpent Brotherhood's remaining chapters expelled him entirely, viewing his failed leadership as a liability to their operations nationwide. James Whitmore continued his ceremonial duties for 2 more years before accepting promotion to Training Command, where he developed new protocols for identifying and preparing soldiers for the unique demands of protecting royal properties. His final day at the palace gates drew an unusually large crowd, including many tourists who had heard about the Action Guard and hoped to see something dramatic. They were disappointed when his replacement ceremony proceeded with perfect military precision and no excitement whatsoever. As James departed in civilian clothes, one young tourist asked his father why everyone seemed so interested in watching a simple guard change. "Because," the father explained, "sometimes the most important protection comes from people you never notice until you need them." James walked away from the palace with no fanfare, just another Londoner disappearing into the city's crowds. But his legacy remained in the enhanced security protocols, the deterrent effect on potential troublemakers, and the reminder that Britain's ceremonial traditions were maintained by warriors, not actors. The chain that Marcus Richardson had swung in anger now resided in a police evidence locker, a reminder of the day when criminal arrogance met professional competence and found itself thoroughly outmatched. The story became part of military folklore, told in training academies and barracks as an example of how preparation, skill, and calm judgment could transform any confrontation. It reminded soldiers that their duty was protection, not aggression, but that protection sometimes required decisive action. Years later, tourists still visit Buckingham Palace, taking pictures with the motionless guards and marveling at their discipline. Most never know that they're being protected by soldiers whose training and experience rival any special forces unit in the world. But sometimes, when trouble approaches those gates, the would-be troublemakers remember a story about a biker who thought he could intimidate a Queen's Guard, and they decide to find somewhere else to cause their problems. The result, as promised in that viral video title, truly was unbelievable. A single guardsman had dismantled an entire criminal organization through nothing more than doing his duty with professional competence. In the end, that was the most remarkable thing of all. James Whitmore had never set out to become famous or to destroy the Serpent Brotherhood. He had simply stood his post, protected his area of responsibility, and responded to threats with exactly the minimum force necessary to neutralize them. It was, in every sense, what a Queen's Guard was supposed to do. The tourists taking pictures outside Buckingham Palace today still don't know this story. They see men in red tunics and bearskin hats, ceremonial figures from a bygone era. They have no idea they're looking at warriors.